Okay. I am attempting for this to... Ah, there we go. Okay, it is live. No one's watching right now, but we'll get there. Um, all right. So we are going to talk about poetry again today, but we're actually going to start talking about poetry. But last time I did one of these live streams, it took 15 minutes for most of people to start watching, and by that time I was done. So we're going to maybe give it a couple of minutes here and see what happens. Um, while we wait, for those of you that, well, no one's here yet, we'll see what happens. Oh, man. Let's see. Okay, you know what? I'm just going to start talking. Who cares? Oh, one whole person's watching. All right, couple of things. A little update here for you guys. This is all housekeeping stuff. The first thing I want to point out is that there's no book review this quarter. I'm not going to make you do a book review. I know some of you are absolutely devastated by the fact that I'm not going to make you do a book review. So if you really wanted to, you could, but you don't have to. The rest of the year, it's going to look a lot like it is now. We're going to have 7 weeks of poetry. We're on week 3. We're going to have 4 more after this. Each week, we'll talk about a different poet. We'll talk about a different concept within poetry. And I'm going to keep it pretty much the same workload as it is right now. It won't be too difficult, 2 journals a week. That's where we're going to keep it. After the 7th week is done, I'll have a week of finals where I'm going to have you guys write me a final essay. It's not really an essay, it's more of like a long journal entry or a letter, but that will be your final score for the year. Will be that, and we'll do that in May, in late May. As I said, no book reviews this quarter. You don't need to worry about it anymore. If you happen to have one of my books that you took home with you to read or something like that, or if you have a school book that you need to get back to the school somehow, please contact me and we'll figure out the best way to do that. It might end up being that you'll bring it into the front office or something like that. But we want to be able to get all of those books back, please. And the last thing on this housekeeping stuff is office hours. If you need help of any kind where email is not going to quite cut it, there is a feature in Canvas where you can do conferences, which is essentially like a Skype call or a FaceTime call. If you really would like to have office hours set up, just email me. I've done it for a few chemistry students already. It works great. It's not a big deal. I don't think you guys will need as much help, but if you do, that's totally fine. I ended up helping someone last week and then we just talked for 25 minutes because we're both lonely. And quarantine is just really like that sometimes. So again, that's all the housekeeping stuff. And as we're doing this, hi Morgan. Yes, so the conference hours would be one-on-one unless someone else wanted to join in. It's like a Skype call, but because it's through Canvas, it's a little bit more legit. It's a little bit less weird, I think. But it's just one-on-one talking. And it worked out really well with chemistry because I was able to draw on my whiteboard and talk about that kind of thing. I can also set up conferences with groups of people. So if more than one person needed help on the same thing, I might try and coordinate it so that it was all one thing. So that's what conferences are. I might not even need it at all for English. It just depends on what you guys need and what you would want. So it's totally something that you control. You email me to set that up. Okay, so that's all the housekeeping stuff. I'm going to start talking about poetry now. Super fun stuff. This week we're actually going to start reading poems. We spent the last 2 weeks on songs. Now we're going to start with poems. So first thing I want to talk about is reading poetry, because a lot of you guys all listen to students read poetry and it's really bad. The first thing that you want to do when you're reading a poem is you want to look at your author and your time period if it's provided. So if there is no time period provided, move on with your life. If there's no author provided, move on with your life. But if you happen to know that the poem was written in like 1865, which happens to be the last year of the Civil War, that might help clue you in on what's going on in that poem. So look for any background like that. And then this right here, read it aloud once or listen and read along at the same time. For one of the assignments this week, I've linked it to a reading of the poem for the Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. There's a link so that you can go and listen to someone read it to you. But reading it aloud is really important. If you're just reading a poem in your head, it's not going to be as, it's not going to work as nicely, basically. It's just, poems are meant to be read aloud. They're meant to be listened to. So read it aloud or trying to have someone read it aloud to you if possible. As you're reading, make sure that you're identifying any confusing words or phrases or anything like that and go ahead and look them up so that that's not a problem anymore. Also look for interesting parts, do a little bit of analysis, and you want to find the poem's theme at that time. We'll talk more about theme here in a little bit. And then read it aloud a second time. If you can read it aloud more than once, that's ideal. That's much better. The other thing that I'll say is a lot of us, when we're reading poems, there's like a line, they're called line breaks, where you're breaking up a sentence into lines like a poem does. If you're pausing at the end of your lines, you're not doing it right. You need to make sure that you continuously read through the line breaks, only pause for punctuation. So those are my tips. You'll be reading probably 2 or 3 poems a week from here on out. Take this into account. I'll try and read on a lecture every week as well. It just depends on the week and what's going on there. Anyway, so that's how we're going to read poetry. So the other thing I want to talk about is rhyme scheme. This is probably something that you talked about in junior high or middle school. Basically, you're just labeling the different lines in a poem or stanza with letters to indicate what rhymes with what. And I've got an example here that we're going to practice that on. So this is a poem called Fire and Ice. It's by Robert Frost. We're reading Robert Frost this week. Robert Frost was a dude who was from New England, so northeastern part of the country, Maine, New York, Vermont, that area. And he lived from, I believe, the 1880s to the 1960s. And a lot of his poetry centered around nature, and it's really lovely stuff. I find that students have an easy time with Robert Frost. They tend to understand him. He's not too deep or weird or anything. And this poem, Fire and Ice, is featured in the Twilight movies. So if it sounds familiar, maybe that's where you've heard it from. But I like it because it's a good poem. So we're going to read this here. I'm going to read it aloud. It starts, so okay. I wish I was teaching in real life. Some say the world will end in fire, some say in ice. From what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. But if I had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate to say that for destruction, ice is also great and would suffice. Okay, so this is a very simple poem. I really like this poem. It's kind of fun. It's got a good rhyme scheme to it. And if we were to label the rhyme scheme, what we're going to do is we're going to label each line in the poem. So the first line here, some say the world will end in fire. The rhyme there that's possible is ire, right? Fire. We'll label that A. Then we'll say some say in ice. That's our second line. It's not, ice and fire do not rhyme. So ice, we're going to label it B. And then the next line, from what I've tasted of desire. Well, desire and fire, they rhyme. So we're going to label that one A. And we're going to do this the whole way. And so this is what that's going to end up looking like. The rhyme scheme here is A, B, A, B, C, B, C, B. Okay? So we go through and look at all the A's. Fire, desire, fire. Those all rhyme. Look at B's. Ice, twice, ice, suffice. Those all rhyme. Perfect. And then we've got our C's. Hate and great. Okay, that's how our rhyme scheme's done. Again, probably a lot of you guys have done this like in middle school. I wanted to refresh just in case because we all know that we're regressing quite a bit right now with quarantine happening. So that's Fire and Ice by Robert Frost. This week, you'll be reading a very famous poem called The Road Not Taken. You might have read it before. You'll have to label the rhyme scheme for that poem. So if this is something that's difficult for you, you need a little extra help, let me know and I'll walk you through it again. Or I can give you some practice or examples or anything like that. We'll work it out. But for the most part, you're just labeling what rhymes with what. Also, I'm sorry if you can hear my neighbors. They're right there. I don't know what's going on. Okay, so now let's talk about themes in poetry. Poetry themes are not the same thing as the subject of a poem. Okay, so Fire and Ice, the theme of that poem is not hot and cold. Themes are going to be related to instead the feelings that the poet has for the subject, whatever that subject is. Are they positive or negative feelings? We're also going to be looking for the story that the poet's trying to tell. What's the message of the poem here? What are we looking for? And the other thing is poems don't necessarily have to have just one theme. So if we looked at Fire and Ice, we're going to look at Nothing Gold Can Stay here in just a second. But if we look at Fire and Ice and we're trying to find the theme, some say the world will end in fire, some say in ice. Okay, fire and ice are opposites. So one thing that we could say as a theme here would be opposites. That's a theme. From what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those that favor fire. But if it had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate to say that for destruction, ice is also great and would suffice. Another theme here is destruction, right? The world ending and destruction are both mentioned. That's another theme. And so themes, they can go on like this. It's not just one thing. It's not the subject of the poem. It's the kind of the inner message of the poem. It's easier to find theme than you think. You'll be required to find themes in another poem coming up this week by yourself, but it's multiple choice. You should be okay. So now let's take a look at this poem called Nothing Gold Can Stay by Robert Frost. This is my favorite Robert Frost poem. It's nice and short. It's got an easy rhyme scheme. It's easy to understand. We're not doing anything too difficult. And so we're going to read this one. I'm going to read it to you. I'm going to find the rhyme scheme of this one, and I'm going to talk about different themes in this poem. So this is Nothing Gold Can Stay by Robert Frost. Nature's first green is gold, her hardest hue to hold. Her early leaf's a flower, but only so an hour. Then leaf subsides to leaf, so Eden sank to grief, so dawn goes down to day. Nothing gold can stay. Okay, so first let's talk about rhyme scheme. Let's go through gold and hold. That would be AA, flower, hour, BB, leaf, grief, CC, day, stay, DD. So AA, BB, CC, DD. That's the rhyme scheme on this one. Now let's talk about theme here. We want to go through and we want to kind of see if we understand what the poem's saying. And poetry sometimes can be hard in this way. So let's look at these first two lines, which are one sentence, so it works out. Nature's first green is gold, her hardest hue to hold. Okay, so nature is being personified here. We're treating it like it's a person. And nature's first green. Okay, think to yourself, what is nature's first green? What would that mean? I'll tell you here in just one second. Basically, what we're talking about here is springtime, right? So if nature is first turning green, the first time nature's green in the year would be during springtime. If you look out your windows right now, the trees are starting to get that little dusting of green all over them. So nature's first green is gold, her hardest hue to hold. Okay, so nature's gonna be green at springtime. That's one of the things going on in this poem. Next two lines here. Her early leaf's a flower, but only so an hour. Okay, maybe that's summer, right? So we've gone spring, the first green, and then she's got a flower, but the flower is not going to stick around. But only so an hour. That means it's going to disappear after an hour. Then leaf subsides to leaf. Okay, subside means to disappear or to lessen. Okay, so think about in nature, leaves subsiding or lessening. We could be talking about autumn and the leaves falling off the trees. And then we talk here, so Eden sank to grief. This is an illusion. Okay, if you remember illusion from last week, which hopefully you do. Eden is the place in the Bible where the first two humans, Adam and Eve, lived. And it was supposed to be this wonderful place, but then Adam and Eve were kicked out of the garden and it was no longer this lovely place. So the leaf subsides to leaf, fall happens, just like, so Eden sank to grief, just like how Eden no longer was this wonderful, perfect place. So dawn goes down to day, so the sun sets, nothing gold can stay. So he's comparing here, we've gone spring, summer, fall. Also remember in the Bible how this horrible thing happened. Also know how the sun sets every day. Nothing gold can stay. Nothing that is lovely can stick around. And so one theme that we could pull from this would be the seasons changing. That would be pretty easy to pull out, and that would be totally valid. You could write me a whole essay, which you won't. You're not going to do an essay on these. But you could, if you wanted to, talk about how this poem just talks about the seasons. But another one here is the idea of impermanence, right? Nothing is permanent. Especially nothing good is permanent. That might be the idea here. It's not necessarily a super uplifting poem. So we've come up with a couple different themes there already. Seasons, impermanence, nothing gold can say, nothing good can stick around. You'll be doing this with another poem by yourself. That was the last slide, just making sure. You'll be doing this with another poem this week. two roads diverged in a yellow wood. Okay, it's called The Road Less Traveled by Robert Frost. You've probably heard of it. But that's all I've got for you guys this week on the lecture. I will be putting a quiz on Canvas based off of this to make sure that you watched it. It should not be difficult. It should be pretty simple. So hopefully that will be something that you can go and get easy points on. Please continue to reach out to me through Remind and email. I love hearing from you guys. I miss you so much. It's very difficult right now to deal with being away from my students and my school. It's hard, but we'll get through this and it'll be okay. And then in August, you can all come and say hi to me in my classroom. So that's all for this week. I will talk to you guys later.